What do you find so amusing?
It's this feverish activity to try and stop something that we know is going to happen.
I've told you of our position so often.
Yes, I know. You can't...
Pull to open.
Pull to open.
Yes, and what do you do?
Well, that was a secret, wasn't it?
I get the impression they don't know where they're heading for. Come to that, do any of us.
I can't decide whether you're a rogue or a half-wit or both.
When would you require my decision?
Now.
Here come the drums!
Bonjour and welcome to Pull to Open, an ongoing quest to watch all of Doctor Who, the entire television program. In random order, I'm Pete Paschal.
Oui, oui, mon ami, je m'appelle Chris Taylor. And yes, we are on a very French trip today, and that's about all the accent I think we're going to do. Mercifully for your ears.
They do in the thing we're about to talk about, I'll say. And I admire you for going all the way with some real French words, other than
that's
just
right.
bonjour.
Some real quotes from Hamilton. Yes, that's right. Well, let's start by catching you fine folks up at home. If you have been under a rock for the last 3 episodes of Pull to Open, here's where we've been recently. Well, now, we started off 3 weeks ago. We were watching Daleks commit suicide and have all sorts of psychological problems that stemmed from the lack of their ability to fire their weapons in Death to the Daleks, those poor Daleks in the Pertwee era. And even more poor Daleks in the sewers of Skaro in The Magician's Apprentice and The Witch's Familiar was where we went to next, in a very, very strange decision by the randomizer to just follow the hapless Daleks wherever they led.
You know what? You describing both of those episodes just now, I suddenly get it. We talk about the randomizer connection every year, but both of those stories feature cities melting.
Yes, they do.
So that's the connection we totally missed.
Yes, they do. If only the city in Death to the Daleks had sewers that the Doctor could work his way in through, that meant then maybe he wouldn't have had all those terrible puzzles to solve. Anyway.
Well, they had hyper-advanced sanitation on Exelon, so
they did.
Totally unnecessary.
Yeah, City of the Exelons, they didn't even have bathrooms, let alone sewers. Anyway, after those sewers, we escaped in our randomizer and we went somewhere that has nothing to do with sewers at all, but had a lot of seaside action and Russians and vampires that weren't called vampires, and some might say a sewer of a plot. But yes, it took us to the... Who would say that? Not us, surely. Anyway, that was the Curse of Henric that last time. A very, very controversial episode of Pull to Open for some, because I know a lot of people out there liked the Curse of Henric, and we did not. And
no
then
bathrooms in that one either, unless you count the far future where the world is just a bathroom and the ancient one emerges out of it.
Yeah, that's right. It's a bit sewerish, and the Curse of Henric itself, the actual steaming pile of green could be. Yeah.
All right, enough already.
Well, enough already. We said
we did that last week
as we jumped into our TARDIS and hit the randomizer button. And I asked it to go forward, and that was a big mistake. We really wanted New Who. And what instead we got was very, very old Who, very old, dealing with a very, very old subject. Yes, we went to another Hartnell historical, which the randomizer really seems to love. Pete, what is the name of this one?
It is Saison 1, Serial. Oh my God, my French is bad. 8.
Quit. Serial quit.
Oh my God, and I can't believe I'm from Canada. Anyway, it's Season 1, Serial 8, The Reign of Terror.
Oui, oui. Yes, it is time to go to revolutionary France. Oh, I said that we wouldn't do the accent, and there I go again.
Yeah.
I did it.
That was my bad.
It's just impossible to avoid. Yeah, Aristo, big dog. Sorry, I'm going to do a lot of Blackadder accents, I think. Yes, we're in the Reign of Terror. That's right, a 6-part Hartnell historical. And I think one of the things the randomizer wanted to do was point out the gaps in our Doctor Who knowledge. It does seem to do that because we said at the end of last week, we were both like, this is missing? Is it mostly missing? I think that's what we think of the Reign of Terror. No, monsieur, no. No, the Reign of Terror is in fact mostly intact.
It's 2/3 intact, yes.
It's yes, there are 4, count them, 4 fully intact episodes that were, I believe, taken from Cyprus, Cyprus TV station, and that we would have had all 6 episodes had the Turks not decided to bomb the TV station in 1974, right? Instead, that's
the biggest loss of that particular. Well, Doctor Who fans have really suffered from unrest at the Commonwealth. But anyway.
That's right. But there are 2 animated episodes that were done for the DVD release in 2012. So we didn't even have to suffer through any telesnaps to watch this. It's all available.
Since we're talking about it now, I wanted to talk about this in our main commentary. We're going to get to that. But I feel like this is such a meta point. Yeah. I want to get it off my chest immediately, which is to say, why isn't this episode on BritBox or literally any other service you could find Classic Who on? I just don't get it. There are 4 intact episodes and 2 animated episodes. Are we really that thrown by transitioning from live action to animation, and therefore it's like, oh no, we can't do that, we can't put this story because people just won't get it, even though there are other animations like The Power of the Daleks? Like, I think people will get it and just sort of slog through it. They might wonder why, but go ahead, that's great. They'll Google it and they'll figure out the legacy of Doctor Who. The story exists, it's been recreated. Why isn't this in the rotation? And it can't just be a rights thing. Yeah. Again, because the other animations are in the
they're in the mix. They're on BritBox.
I mean, it seems like there's clearly been some decision made to, unless it's fully intact, either as an animation or as a live action, we're just not going to do these hybrid ones. And I say, stop that policy. Get everything out there that you possibly can that is a complete story. Like, if it's incomplete, fair enough. Maybe you don't. I could see that being a hard line, but just put it out there.
Yeah, and you might say that the Reign of Terror has been skipped because, it's not the best known of historicals. People don't really talk about it in the same breath as the Aztecs, or some of the other historicals that we visited. But it's kind of super important because it was the end of the first season, right? And it does have an ending that's appropriate to the end of the first season. Hey, let's go find our destiny in the stars kind of moment. Kind of similar to the Time Meddler, right? So it's historically important. Like, it's a phase that Doctor Who might have been cancelled, after its first season. This might have been it. It's kind of really important to see it in all its glory. So what are you doing, BritBox?
Well, and I just feel like people doing rewatches, like, it's actually kind of difficult to find, like, if you actually decide today as a fan, I want to watch it. Yeah, there's things online. You can go to Dailymotion, which is actually what I did, but there's no real official place you can go watch it. And there's a few uploads of the animations to YouTube, but the real episodes aren't there, like the live action ones. And so it's kind of like, if you decide you want to watch, like, I tried to look for the DVD, not available on Amazon. No one was selling it on eBay. If it were not for sort of these pirated copies that are just floating around, I just can't see it as a fan who wants to see it and is willing to pay money to see it, which makes no freaking sense.
Well, here we are complaining like sans culottes.
There you go. Rant over.
Complaining like the Estate Generale in May 1789. Yes, that's right. We're going to get a huge history corner. Well, not so big because I haven't done that much research, but the French Revolution history corner. My goodness, I have to say, Pete, the French Revolution, as far as historians are concerned, it's like the ninja level. It's like, this is your PhD. It is so complicated and so many factions turning on each other. And oh my goodness, I had a hell of a time even sort of doing the kind of the limited history corner that we're going to have. Because the Reign of Terror is just 1 year, thankfully, within the French Revolution. But we'll get to that. We'll get to why does the Doctor like the Reign of Terror so much? We're told it's his favorite period of history, which is a bit disturbing.
Obviously, because he gets to play dress up. But anyway, we're going to get to all of that. But folks, before we get to that, we want to just remind you, hey, if you're on YouTube, hello, we're here. You can see us. And not only that, but you have a special thing you can do, which is you can become a true companion of Pull to Open through our membership program on YouTube for the low, low price of $7.99 a month. You will not only get that warm feeling in your hearts of supporting this fine Doctor Who podcast, but you will also be able to get the podcast a day early. That's right. You will get it Friday morning, not Saturday morning. And you will be a Pull to Open hipster. You might even call yourself a musketeer. You'll get all these titles.
Yes, the Scarlet Pimpernel.
There it is.
You will be a true citizen of the Republic, and you will not fall under suspicion. You will not be a victim of the Terror if you are a true companion.
And you can even raise your game if you really, really want to and really pledge total allegiance to this podcast revolution. You can become a Viscount for a little bit more per month. And if you're at the Viscount level, not only will you get a massive shout out here on the podcast, you get to be on the podcast. You can come on an episode of Pull to Open, and we will get your thoughts on whatever story we are talking about that week. So you get that guest spot at the Viscount level. Why not?
Yes. And despite what you are going to hear in the history corner, if you are a Viscount, you will not be led to meet Madame Guillotine. You will be treated nicely. Not like... Nicely, not like Viscounts in the French Revolution or the French equivalent. Yes. Right. So, yeah, thanks, fans. Thanks, fans already out there. We've got some super fans on Instagram, right, Pete?
That's right. So we have figured out a few things behind the scenes with Instagram. I'll just say that. That's all I'll say about it. But I wanted to shout out a couple of longtime fans on Instagram that we've been talking to recently. I wanted to say thank you so much, Miranda, for being out there and sticking with us for so long. Been a big fan on Instagram for a while and is still trucking along. Thank you, Miranda. And I also wanted to shout out Natalie, who was listening to our podcast while she was doing a rewatch of the entire series from the beginning, from William Hartnell, and invented a way to listen to Pull to Open, which we are calling the fireplace method. That's her name. I actually forced her to name it because I really liked it. I wanted a name for this method. So what she does is that on her rewatch, she will listen when she was rewatching. She would, as she goes through the rewatch, she would listen to the podcast for the ones we had done, and then once she'd finished the rewatch, and then we'd done others, she'd go back and fill them in.
Whoa!
Right. So she'd listen to the ones that we had filled in. On her rewatch, right, and sort of go through them again, and then sort of keep looping back. Every time through the episodes we've done until, I guess, she's can listen to everything.
My goodness.
So that's it. That's the fireplace holder. It's a little timey-wimey, right?
Why?
Back, reliving.
Oh, I see. We're talking girl in the fireplace.
Same moments, yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. Yes, well, thank you so much for creating that, Natalie. Sorry that you're going to have to loop back to the Reign of Terror once again. You probably thought you were done with all that with the censor rights, but no, we're coming in hot with the story after the censor rights. Right. Yeah, okay, the fireplace method. I love it. Pull to Open, obviously getting somewhere if there's a method for listening to it. I'm personally excited about the listening to all the Pull to Open in sequential Doctor Who order when we've done everything, and seeing how
circa the 70th anniversary special.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, speaking of coming in hot, also coming in hot is the Whomoji challenge.
Oh boy.
Which, of course, is the part of the program where I get to torture Chris with by describing emojis which represent Doctor Who titles and then watch him rack his brain trying to think of the title.
Of course, Pete, that the guillotine was invented as a humane form of execution. Let's just say that. I do not think the Whomoji challenge is a humane thing. I will be launching a protest against it, and just guillotine me right now, sir.
Well, maybe if we fail to get it 3 times in a row, you can go free. What is freedom? I'm not sure what that looks like, but
all right,
we're a few times away from that. So let's get into it. Are you ready, sir?
As I'll ever be.
All right. 1 emoji. And it is the blushing happy face with the hand in front of it. So there's a little smile behind the hand. The eyes are smiling.
Oh, God.
And there's a little blush going on. And that is it.
Blushing, smiling face.
Dropping that in the chat. There it is.
Okay, is it's not listen, it's not, oh God, is there like a don't speak story? Is that, am I warm at all with the, is it like about not speaking? Is it,
I would say it's about something else that you utter if you're having this sort of expression, maybe.
Kablam! No, it's
getting warm.
Oh, okay. It's not can you hear me? God, something you would say if you were blushing and you were trying not to say anything?
Well, I didn't say. The verb I used was utter.
Oh, you're trying not to. Oh, God. Suddenly, all Doctor Who titles have fled from my head, as often happens in the Whomoji Challenge. I'm guessing that we're talking New Who.
Yes.
Okay.
So when I said getting warm with Kerblam, you're actually getting pretty close in terms of the era. So let me do a little motion for the YouTubers and the Spotify video podcasters that might give it away, but that's okay.
Oh, it's not smile. It's oh God, Pete, that is a wonderful sort of. You've obviously watched a lot of animated cartoons like that. That's
so for those that can't see it,
right
I'm miming the emoji with my hand in front of my face, and I'm kind of like,
is it
up and down?
Is it the giggle?
It's the giggle!
Oh, nice! And that is our first 14th Doctor Whomoji.
That's correct.
Oh, I wasn't even thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Joe Rep, for giving us that one. A little on the hard side, it looks like, but they get harder from here on out. He's got a couple more in his package. So, folks, you too can submit a Whomoji for the Whomoji Challenge. All you have to do is leave a review for the podcast. And the best place to do that is in the Apple Podcast app. All you need to do is leave your Whomoji as either the title or the text of the review, and we will do the rest. The rest being giving our equivalent of the guillotine treatment to Chris Taylor here on this podcast. Oh, I love it so much.
It is a far better thing I do, a far better place I go to. By going to Poll to Open, not the Whomoji Challenge. Poll to Open, yes, that's right. If you're on Spotify, bien sûr, le Poll to Open, le Poll to Ouvre. I'm so sorry.
You're so easy to trigger.
You really, yes. This is really a British thing. It's like, oh yes, someone does a comedy French accent, and everyone wants to join in. Yes, fine, old British tradition. But yes, we have polls to open on Spotify. If you pull from the bottom of the screen, you can already, if you wish, rate the Reign of Terror. Terrible Reign of Terror. Bad Robespierre. Rate the Reign of Terror, the story, using the poll to open rating system, and then we will read it out in the future. I'll read out the polls in progress, because of course these polls keep going for days and days and days, as long as we could set it on Spotify, right, Pete?
Years and years.
Years and years. Over 2,000 days left to vote. If you're in line, stay in line. But we have some results now from The Magician's Apprentice, The Witch's Familiar, which, just to remind you, Pete said was a solid Dalek.
That's right.
Which is what we give to a good episode of Doctor Who. I said it was a 3/4 Viscount banger, which is what we rate the best of the best, and 1/4 Professor Hater, which is what we give to a bad episode, but they tried something new, they went somewhere new, they did something, they tried to educate us. So that was it was a complicated rating.
Well, you tried to educate us that was correct, but now the fans have, in this case, sided with me, because the Dalek is the champion in this poll for The Magician's Apprentice, which is familiar at almost half. It's about 46 and a bit %, and that's far and away the leader in the poll. However,
is it though? If you add up the Viscount Banger and the Professor Hater, you get 46.2%. Yes, it's equal.
So it's a half Dalek, half banger. So that still isn't a 3/4 banger.
No,
quarter hater.
No, but you put the two together, and they're about equal, sir. So we've got like a French Revolution situation where this poll is just being torn apart by internal conflict.
I feel like this is the taste great, less filling poll of pull to open. You could see it one way or the other way, because you're right. If you eliminate the Dalek rating and you assume that's the average, then you get it. And then if you eliminate your stuff, clearly the Dalek is like far and away the thing. So let's just call it off. Let's just say we both win.
Yeah, that's how revolutions go, isn't it? We can just call the whole thing off. Hey, we got a disagreement about how this revolution is going to go. Let's call it off. No, sir. No, sir, this is a democracy, and as such, we're going to have to go to the Supreme Court to get the final analysis on this hung election. And the Supreme Court is you, dear listeners, so go and vote on The Magician's Apprentice, The Witch is Familiar. Your votes can change and decide the final ratings on this. It's still open, and we'll revisit it in a future podcast. I'll be sure to keep a special eye on this particular rating, just to see who wins.
All right. Speaking of visiting things, we have to visit now our regular segment that we begin every commentary with. There's no denying it. There's no getting around it. We need to summarize the plot of The Reign of Terror in record time. Now, The Reign of Terror is 6 classic episodes, and for every classic episode, we allot 30 seconds. And that would give the person doing this a full 3 minutes to describe the plot of The Reign of Terror. And whoever that monsieur is, Monsieur Christopher Taylor? Let's go Taylor.
I do not know who this man is.
Yeah.
It is not me. Sorry, Christian names only. That's a special secret system. Christopher,
are you ready for this? You got it? You got it.
Oh, no. Je suis not ready. No, okay. No, I'm
you are
ready. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's just go right into it.
I'm going to stand in the Place de Revolution and declaim this and whip the crowd up into a frenzy with my TLDW.
I've got faith in you, even though history being my guide might be leading me astray. I think it's going to be all right. All right, here we go. The official pull to open summary of The Reign of Terror in 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so the Doctor, Ian, and Barbara and Susan have landed, and the Doctor wants to kick Ian and Barbara out because they wanted to leave, and he's being all huffy about it. And Ian's like, well, hey, why are you doing that? We don't even know where we are. Come on out for a drink. And the Doctor's like, okay. And they find this abandoned farmhouse, and there are these costumes in it, and they realize they're in France in the Reign of Terror, which turns out, according to Susan, to be the Doctor's favorite period in history. And it turns out to be a farmhouse that's like on this sort of underground railroad for aristocrats. They're getting smuggled out, and they meet 2 of them, but then the soldiers arrive, and they shoot the 2 aristocrats, and they arrest everyone, and they get taken to Paris, to a famous prison, and they get thrown into different cells. And while Susan and Barbara are trying to literally dig their way out of the cell, Ian gets into a cell with this dude who's dying, and he tells Ian that he's got to meet this guy called Jules, and by the sign of this pub or other, and then he dies. And then
1 minute.
Ian escapes for a bit, and so does Susan and Barbara get freed on their way to the guillotine by a couple of Scarlet Pimpernel types who take them back to their hideout. And there's also this guy called Leon Colbert who flirts with Barbara, and Susan's just sick. She's kind of out of action, and Ian meets Jean, who's also part of this safe house, and the Doctor is walking to Paris because there was a fire at the farmhouse, and he gets involved in this chain gang and gets out of that, and then he gets into Paris and gets his costume. And tries to free everyone from the prison by walking and pretending to be this authority from the south of France. But the tailor is on his case and gives this guy Lemaitre the Doctor's signet ring, and but Lemaitre turns out to be James Sterling, who's the Scarlet Pimpernel type character who Ian has to contact. But meanwhile, he's already introduced the Doctor to Robespierre, who's the head of the Reign of Terror and the head of France at this time, who's just paranoid against getting brought down, and he thinks the deputies are plotting against him. And guess what? He is, and everyone after everyone gets free and everyone gets in and out of prison all the time. But eventually, they go to this pub where one of the deputies is going to meet Napoleon. It turns out it's Napoleon Bonaparte, and he's like offering this role if they take over Robespierre. But anyway, it all happens. Robespierre gets arrested. They can't change history, not one line, and they head off back to the TARDIS with all with Jules and James Sterling and everyone, and then they go off towards the stars, and it's sort of a bit of a damn squib because they can't really change history, and so nothing much happens.
Time. Nice.
Hey.
There you go. Good job. You got it. I feel like you were wrapping it up around 2:45.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Well, really, not much to say there at the end, right?
Yeah, and you thankfully avoided any number of rabbit holes you could have gone down with the jailer, with the Doctor. Not the doctor, but the physician, I should say.
Oh, God, yes.
I'm glad they called him the phisian and not the doctor.
The physician.
Although if they had called him the doctor, there could have been some pretty fun French farce going on. Like, who's he talking about? What?
Who is the doctor? Doctor Who?
Yeah.
Dr.
Thinking about that, it is the choices they make here. I think generally work because they're taking it seriously. That's what I'll say. Like they apart from the jailer, perhaps, and there really aren't that many comedic moments or characters in this particular story, and I think the jailer then just functions as
he's the comic relief.
Kind of comic relief. I think not too comical because he's kind of creepy comic relief, but generally they take it seriously. They don't go for farcical things. There's not really a lot of jokes. And I think that's very, very appropriate. I think this is essentially trying to give you a tour, not necessarily of historically accurate details, which we'll get into, I'm sure, in the corner, but it is I think, a very effective tour of this sort of the society that's decaying because of all the violence and fear within it. And that's pretty good. Like I think the feel of this episode is very good. You really do sort of feel the peril when they're in the prison and sort of constantly getting captured and have guns trained on them, and the bayonets actually look pretty serious.
Yeah.
So points for the Reign of Terror for going to a kind of, obviously a very troublesome part of history and not really. I think the word is uncompromising that I read in one review. I think that might have been the Discontinuity Guide, and I think that's pretty accurate.
It is. It's also unfortunate because it's got so many characters that we get introduced to one after the other, and it's not until like episode 3 that we even meet our sort of main, the house with the aristocratic Underground Railroad. So we're not really given a lot of chance to sympathize with these characters. And when we finally meet Robespierre, who's sort of the first big historical character that we meet, he doesn't even feel real. Like it's the dialogue that is put into his mouth. It's so staged. and he just kind of talks. He doesn't talk like a real human. He's like, for example, he's just like, one of the first things he does is lists the number of executions that there had been in the last 9 days in Paris alone, and he says, "What a memory I shall leave if this thing lasts." Really, do historical characters talk like that? What an impression I shall leave on history if this is the only thing people remember me for. And what's especially dumb is that he there's one point just before his downfall where he's like listing this date. He's like, this date will live in infamy or whatever, and it's 27th of July 1794. Well,
right.
First of all, okay, that's the date that the downfall of Robespierre begins. But that's not actually even what Robespierre would have called it. It was known as the month of Thermidor, because that's what the French did. They, just to confuse things, they introduced an entire new calendar after the Revolution. And the month of Thermidor was between July and August. It was literally the hot month. So things got a bit steamy in that Thermidor.
Understandably, the revolution just wants longer summers. That's what it was all about, right? More vacation.
But you don't really get a sense of Robespierre as a human being. And there is now I know Robespierre as a human being. There's so much you could have done with the guy.
Yeah, and I think to your point, if this were made today and you kind of look at other borderline pure historicals as precedent. So the one I'm thinking of specifically is the Witchfinders, where King James becomes a character and one of the best characters in that particular adventure. I think you would write it that way. Thankfully, here, yes, you're not wrong about him being this sort of historical caricature rather than a character, but he's not in it much. That said, I'm not going to sort of go like, and all the other characters are awesome and great, and I was super into them, because I think they all sort of, whoever they are, Leon and Jules and all the others, Barras is mentioned and seen at one point.
He's a real one.
Yeah, you get all of that. There's just a few too many, and honestly, that's a little bit. Again, Reign of Terror a bit in a nutshell. A few too many episodes, few too many characters, few too many capture, recapture, double crosses that go through this story. I get it. This could have been 4 episodes. It might have even been able to 3 episodes if you're going by New Who standards, right? But that said, I mean, pretty good stuff generally. I think the double crosses, sort of the fear, the costumes, and again, it's sort of punctuated with the jailer throughout. You get some. It holds your attention for at least 4 of those episodes, and it is kind of brought to not quite another level, but when they pull in Napoleon at the end, it's like, oh yeah, okay, that's cool. Again, just sort of showing you what happens, not really doing a whole hell of a lot of interesting stuff with it.
It will not surprise you to learn, Pete, and we're not really in the history corner yet, but I'm just going to say it out here because Napoleon does show, well, the whole thing is the corner of history. Napoleon was not there, was not like so ahistorical, and everything else is sort of like being like, hey kids, we're going to teach you a bit about the French Revolution. But to have Napoleon just show up, Napoleon was in Italy at the time. And Napoleon was, it sort of suggested that they...
Chris, maybe that's what they want you to think.
It was suggested that...
Thank you, Apple, for giving me that thumbs up, by the way.
I love it. The thumbs up. There it is. So... They had in the last episode.
On YouTube, the bubbles are coming. Am I getting one now? No, I don't know. Okay.
Bubbles are coming. Anyway, no. In the last episode, like, why even do? Because you either you're teaching kids about history or you're not, right? Yeah. So it suggests in the last episode Napoleon's going to take charge if Robespierre has his downfall, and you would leave that thinking that, because the last thing they talk about in the TARDIS is like, well, what if we could have just written a letter to Napoleon, or what if we could tell him about his future? And Ian's all like, keep an eye on Napoleon Bonaparte to Jules or Sterling or whatever,
or also the camera.
Yeah. Hey, kids, keep an eye on Napoleon Bonaparte. But it's ahistorical. It's like it's 4 years before Napoleon would take over. He was actually he wasn't a potential replacement for Robespierre. He was actually briefly arrested for being. He was suspected of being too pro Robespierre because Robespierre's brother, Auguste. Will not surprise you to learn there was a bit of nepotism in the revolutionary government here. Had actually gone to Italy and met him and wrote to Maximilian Robespierre, the Robespierre that we know and love, and said, "Hey, this Napoleon guy's pretty cool. You should keep an eye on him." So that marked him out as being a bit too close, and he was actually arrested, and then he was freed. But he'd only just been given command of the artillery in Italy. He was not anywhere near taking over. It would be a meteoric rise over the next 4 years. Yeah. So why?
Well, why
even do that?
Yeah. Well, I think that it's slapdash, and I think you can kind of tell that they're writing and rewriting here on the fly to some extent. So again, I think not to be an apologist for it, but there's no internet in the 60s. There's not. You'd have to run and go and do some research, and they should have, and they did, and they probably did some. They just didn't get some scholar or someone on the line at Oxford who could actually vet the script and give them stuff. And even if they still want to throw in Napoleon, which I think is you have total license to do because you want to throw in figures and do interesting stuff for a TV audience. This isn't supposed to be a lecture. Even if you still go ahead, well, we're going to be ahistorical, like be clear about that. Do something like I just did, like, oh, this isn't in the history books, but hey, maybe it was, and write it in such a way that maybe it could have happened, even though there's no record of it, and just be clear that's what you're doing. So I think it's okay.
When Ian, in fact, in that bar where Ian puts on his mock accent of like, thank you, sir. When Napoleon walks in,
it's like the one mock accent of the whole thing. We can talk about that in a minute. Anyway.
And he's like, and Napoleon pokes his head out of the room, and he's like, Barbara, it's Napoleon Bonaparte. At least Barbara could have been like, oh, he's not supposed to be here. That's strange, Yeah, so exactly.
And how does he even know, right? Like, I guess the hat.
But he was wearing the hat before. Like. It was just like he walked in with like his scarf across his face, and then he looks out with his scarf not across his face. Brilliant disguise there, Napoleon.
Yeah, it's like we all know what Napoleon looks like. I mean, I guess you could sort of go by just how tall he is, maybe. But anyway, so yeah, you make up the accent. So I just want to get that out of the way. Like, I like that they really make no mention of it throughout, like why everyone's speaking English. They just don't even address it, which I think is the smartest possible way to do it. No one's doing a dumb accent, and no one's even pointing out who's speaking French and who isn't. So this is the way to do it, right? Because it's like you're doing it essentially as a play, which is what Doctor Who was back then. It was essentially a play on tape. And, you don't have to, like, again, you don't have to address it at certainly this point in Doctor Who. Now, later they would go on to address that the TARDIS translates things, and that's how this sort of works. And that's sort of actually a really interesting thing. And then everyone can sort of watch the show with that layer on top of it. But at this point, you don't need it. And I kind of thought it was kind of laughable how the novel tried to explain it. So, I have the novel. I think you checked it out as well. This is something that I've had since the 80s. And as I was rereading it, when I was coincidentally at the same time watching this, it's every few pages it talks about someone's talking in sort of passable French or impeccable French, particularly like the Doctor and Barbara and Ian, and it just kind of draws attention to a thing that you don't really want it to, right? And and it kind of, I think it works a little bit with the Doctor because, of course, he's this mysterious person, and this was written by Ian Marter, so it's written well after everything, and so you kind of you have to sort of make him to be this mythical person. But I just found it just to be generally clumsy. Like again, why focus on the language when really you just want the drama? So I'm glad they didn't do the accents or anything in the show because I think that would have made it laughable. Everyone hates those accents. And
you say that the jailer does have a broad northern accent to sort of symbolize that he's a bit thick, which is unfortunate.
Like a northern accent in terms of Northern British accent.
Northern
right?
British accent, yes. Which is, sort of a long-held convention, whatever. But yeah, let's not dwell on accents. Let's talk about how this works as a story for the four regulars. Because I think two of them have a really good reign of terror. And two of them have a really bad one. The two good ones, I think, are the Doctor and Barbara.
Oh, I was gonna guess, but I was right.
It's kind of obvious, right? I mean, Susan is just terrible. She gets sick and then gets well without any help from the physician at all, who dobs them in to the Revolutionary Guard. So, what was the point of that?
Yeah, and you kind of wonder what's the point of even going to the physician in the first place, because she seems to be on the mend already. I think that's even part of the dialogue. And it's like, well, we need to take her to a doctor anyway. Like, no, you don't. You really don't.
Yeah.
Again, Barbara is the history teacher. Like, you know what doctors are like and what medicine is like in this period.
Leeches.
Do you really think a physician is going to do better than you, a relative layperson, but a smart person from 1963? Right, with the benefit of modern medicine. I don't think so.
Yeah, so that's just weird, and you can see why Carole Ann Ford, was not happy with her role in the show, because this is all she gets to do. I mean, she's so hapless. There's one point at which Barbara and Susan are trying to tunnel their way out of the cell, and Susan, instead of hitting the ground, hits herself.
Right.
Just why is she so incompetent? So it's kind of a bad episode. It's a bit of a bad story for Ian, but that's largely because William Russell was the last of the regulars to take a vacation during the filming, the famously punishing filming of season 1. Which was extended. So he gets to go off, and he pre-recorded his bits in prison. So he went off and had a 2-week vacation during the Reign of Terror. Good for him. But the Doctor gets to dress up, which is nice.
Be large and in charge.
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot more character for the Doctor in this, and it's interesting. I talked with Death to the Daleks about introducing a new fan to Doctor Who. It's always a lovely moment when that happens, isn't it? When one of your friends becomes a Doctor Who fan. This friend has since named the Doctor, or at least the first Doctor, Dr. Sassy Little Bitch, which I think is entirely appropriate for what he does here. He's super sassy all over the place, to the overseer that captures him on the road.
Right.
Eventually braining him with a shovel. But he didn't even need to be sassy to the overseer and get captured as part of that chain gang. Right.
Yeah, and I was watching this with Grace, and after we finished and she gave her review of it being essentially too long, the whole idea, she kind of reflected back on that bit where he gets thrown into the chain gang or whatever it is. And she was like, what's the point of that? And I was like, yeah, that I think that was some script editing. That's what we call filler, Grace. And then not only that, because I think she thought of it because the scene subsequent to that where he just keeps walking, and it's not even William Hartnell, it's just Hartnell shot, or the Doctor shot from behind, walking along very sort of French-looking streets.
Mr. Brian Proudfoot is the guy who's the Doctor's stunt double for walking.
And he has the distinction of being the first person to do location shooting for Doctor Who. It wasn't even the cast, it was just this understudy for William Hartnell got to be the first person to sort of quote unquote act on location for Doctor Who.
Yeah, you could update your spreadsheets if you wish and call this the first multi-Doctor story. If you're being very loose with your definition, 2 people play the Doctor within this. One of them just for the walking scenes. But apparently, Brian Proudfoot would go on set, he was very serious about this role. He went on set and copied Hartnell's walking style, in preparation for this. On the scene footage.
Yeah. Oh, good for him.
Which annoyed the hell out of William Hartnell, who was already upset because the director was Hungarian and Hartnell didn't like foreigners.
I mean, to be fair, Hartnell being annoyed, it's like that's a good day for him. Like he's annoyed 3 times before breakfast. It's just not a day if he doesn't do that. But anyway, it's a clear, like it's all clearly padding, right? And they're just kind of giving him one extra obstacle to encounter on the road on the way to Paris while he's doing his thing. Now, that said, I do think you're right that otherwise it's really good for the Doctor and him being able to talk himself into this costume and then be more or less large and in charge for a good chunks of the story. Is really fun to see, and I like
Ian new
sort
Who-ish, isn't it? The way the Doctor runs ring around the jail, like it's establishing that the Doctor can do. His weapons are his words.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and it's really good for that. And he really loves that outfit. My goodness, I think this is the first historical where the Doctor, because he doesn't wear anything in Marco Polo, right? Where the Doctor's like wearing local costumes.
Have they shown that costume in the TARDIS since? Because he goes back with it. You see the final scene, he's changing back into his outfit. And you kind of like, oh, wow, that was such a great costume. I don't know, eagle-eyed people, maybe it's in the Tenet, wardrobe scene or something like that. But I would love to just see a reference to his sort of tricolor thing and his feather hat, and it's like, oh, there it is.
Well, we know Shooty's Doctor likes his clothes, so maybe this can be referenced. Maybe he can look wistfully at that outfit and go, all the tragedy of the Reign of Terror.
My favorite period.
Yes, my favorite period. Yeah, so let's talk about that. While we're talking about the Doctor, we'll get on to Barbara. But let's talk about the fact that Susan. So this has been smoothed over in Doctor Who history, as some fans are like, oh yeah, his favorite moment is the French Revolution, and this was sort of what RTD and Moffat were getting at with Tennant's love of France, like saying Allons-y, and the girl in the fireplace. Like all of this was supposed to be a reference to the Doctor kind of loving France in general, loving the French Revolution in general. But that's not what is said. What is actually said in the script, and this is according to Susan, so you could say rule number 1: the Doctor's granddaughter lies.
That's 1A.
But the dialogue is Susan says, we might not get back to the ship if Grandfather hears we're in the Reign of Terror. Not the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror.
Right.
And Ian says, why not? Susan says, the Reign of Terror, is his favorite period in the history of Earth. Everything. Now, the Reign of Terror, again, we'll get into the history corner, but it's 1 year.
Right.
It's 1 year in the middle of the French Revolution with the most guillotine action. So does the Doctor just like seeing people's heads cut off? Is that why he loves the Reign of Terror so much? Does he just like chaos and confusion and sassiness?
Well, I think what you just said is probably better in that, like, chaos, confusion, and the messiness that results from this sort of revolutionary idea that you can't really understand the consequences of. I think it's something that he struggles with, as he goes along on his adventures and sort of creates these little revolutions everywhere. But he must be on some level ambivalent about it, right? If he loves this period so much, because he must appreciate the complexity and the potential fallout if it's done in such a chaotic manner.
Yeah. I kind of like it as a way that sort of kind of enhances the mystery of the Doctor. But also, it's like it doesn't make it clear what the Doctor's politics necessarily are. Now, we know from his contact with the Overseer that he's just against blowhards, and like you'll get more work done if you talk to these people nicely, sir, he says in a more sassy way. But he, you could say that he likes the Reign of Terror because it's like, he likes seeing lots of aristocrats with their head getting cut off, and he's actually on the side of the people. Or maybe he likes it because he's kind of a bit more conservative, and he's like, you see what happens, you put progressives in charge, and they go full Stalin within a few years, which is basically what the Reign of Terror is. It's a very cautionary tale for, liberals and purity tests.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But let's
see all
go
that.
on.
You can also get to make the case that he isn't as into it anymore. Like maybe this is early young Doctor loving the idea of revolutions and just, you know, the wanting to dive feet first into the messiness of history, and then older, wiser Doctor that we sort of see certainly in New Who, has taken on sort of a more mature outlook on it, and maybe even like you might even see hints of this in like Colin Baker, where he says, I remember in Mark of the Ronnie, that even though he interferes constantly, he's like not to that extent, you know. So maybe he's gotten a little more cautionary in his old age, but all speculation, really.
Yes. Well, we'll get into the history corner shortly, but let's talk about Barbara, who has, I think, the best episode of any of the regulars.
Totally.
Not only does she get to slap the jailer hard across the face when the jailer even suggests that he might be able to let her out for a little compagnie, you know, and that's a good moment for her. But also, like, Leon Colbert is hitting on her like crazy.
And she's into it.
She's into it, yes. It's a good thing that Ian is not around to see this, or you might get a bit jealous.
Well, Barbara has a great story. I totally agree. She gets to be sort of matronly with Susan, and unfortunately there's that sort of contrast with them where she's being the sensible, practical one when they need to escape, and Susan's just, I can't do it, Barbara, I can't do anything. And, you know, not to blame Susan for her own illness, but it is like she's not coming out very well in that scene, whereas Barbara is like, okay, like, oh, I'm taking command of this. All the stuff you just said, 100%. But she also has like a couple of nice, I would even go as far to say magical scenes where she gets to be the history teacher, but from a different perspective. You know, she gets to use that arm's length perspective on the revolution and sort of talk about Leon, and in that particular scene where he talks about he's a patriot, and if we see things from his point of view,
yes,
there's
I've got that whole exchange here because I think it's Aztecs worthy. It's like, you know, it's a shame that the Reign of Terror isn't better known, like, because you guys you're missing this scene where Ian basically comes in and he's like witnessed the Reign of Terror firsthand. He's like, you know, I could have been shot, or I could have shot this guy, or like, you know, he was trying to, you know, it was also him, like, you know, and he kind of, his blood is up, and Barbara's like, no, from his perspective, he was a patriot. And then she says, the revolution isn't all bad, and neither are the people who support it. It changed things for the whole world, and good, honest people gave their lives for that change. And Ian's stuck in the mud, and he says, well, he got what he deserved. And Barbara says, you check your history books, Ian, before you decide what people deserve. Damn. And then she drops a microphone weirdly on the set, inventing the mic drop. No, that doesn't happen. But then later, like, she has the existential moment with Ian and Jules. She says, I'm so sick and tired of death. We never seem to be able to get away from it. And Jules just says, there is no way, Barbara. Like, whoa, dark.
Yeah, some great scenes. And I love the one with Ian. Honestly, if there is a scene where I would say Ian falls in love with Barbara, it's probably that one where she speaks so passionately from the heart and just really gets him to reflect on his own actions and the things happening around him. I mean, I think their bond is nice and stronger. I think it's even before that scene, but they get a little close to each other when they finally are reunited at the house and stuff. And just the body language between the two of them at that point, you really feel like there is a deeper, beyond friendship connection between Ian and Barbara, for sure. I definitely got that vibe. I think it was episode 3.
You kind of get that vibe whenever they're talking. I kind of hadn't noticed this before, but like they're in each other's, like, for want of a better word, face space.
Oh, they're in their personal space, all right. Yeah, they don't mind at all. They're very used to it. Yeah, I like that.
Oh yeah. You can tell there's normally right. There's normally a pillow between them in those moments. Like, it's definitely got pillow talk vibes. But yeah, then there's one more thing that I want to mention about Barbara, which is right at the end, where she does actually reference the Aztecs and what she learned from that. And she actually kind of blows open the whole story and its main weakness, which is when she says, Robespierre will be guillotined no matter what we do. So it's like, okay, what were we, just tourists there? And then the Doctor responds with, we can't stem the tide, but we can at least stop being carried away with the flood, which is interesting. It's, definitely the first in a long line of the Doctor saying, well, we can't do anything, but like maybe we can save one life or whatever.
All these poetic lines, it's really nicely written on this level. And maybe it's just the influence of the French culture and they're all getting inspired. But I'm really happy to have seen the Reign of Terror finally. And I'll just sort of say personally, I always love revisiting this era because this is, if not my favorite TARDIS team, it's in my top 3 of the Doctor, Ian, Barbara, and Susan. And the idea that, again, not to steer back to I don't want to reopen the whole thing on this being available, but I kind of want to flip that. And like, I'm very grateful that in today's internet age, we can relatively easily see this and I can revisit this team and see what are, for me, effectively new adventures with them.
Yeah.
So I'm really super happy to have seen the Reign of Terror and sort of see these lines and see these moments. And I'm also going to piggyback off your comments about the Barbara and reflecting on the Aztecs, because I do think that final scene where they're talking in the TARDIS about, well, what would have happened if we'd warned Napoleon and, what would have tried to shoot him? I guess we would have missed. I almost feel like they're reopening the Aztecs, you can't change history, not one line bit.
Yeah.
Which, again, we talked about that at the time, where it's like subsequent Doctor Who has sort of shown that there isn't a physical law that prevents you from changing history. There is what you might call sort of the flow of time or the arc of time that is probably hard to bend, but can you change history? 100%. Time can be rewritten. And even though that's not what they're explicitly saying here, I do feel like this sort of is the first step to reopening the book on that. And which subsequent Doctor Who would then fill in with like, yes, you can.
Barbara throughout here is kind of just done with the Doctor's bullshit throughout it, and like she's
there you go.
She's kind of instituting a bit of a reign of terror herself. Like there's one line which is a kind of a blink and you miss it line where, Barbara is saying that she tells Ian when he comes into the house, "Oh, you need to go to talk to Jules," and Ian just has a line like, "That sounded like an order." What is this? A woman giving me orders? Are we married already? What the hell? And then when she's like, they're waiting for the Doctor, she says, "Oh, no doubt we'll get the whole story several times." Like, whoa, getting a little sassy about the Doctor's habit of repeating himself and
nice.
Like telling long stories that perhaps go on a bit too long.
So I'm sensing a pivot to the corner, but
that's right.
Before we do that, I would love to everyone know about our corner of the internet, which is at pulltoopen.net, where you can sign up for our newsletter and get full notes on this episode and every episode. You can also support us there with a subscription, and you can also support us on Patreon. Yes, you can also become a patron of the show at patreon.com/pulltoopen. And if you do that, we will get you into the True Companion status on YouTube, which of course means you will get the podcast a day early.
Indeed. Well, before we get into the corner, I did want to actually bring up, I guess this is History Corner as well, because it's all about sort of the image of the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror. Are you familiar with, Pete, with the Scarlet Pimpernel?
A little bit. I'm actually familiar about it through a Wayne and Schuster comedy sketch, which was a comedy duo in Canada, which used to do something called the Brown Pumpernickel, I think. And I didn't know the original version of that until many years later. I just thought it was kind of a funny, hilarious thing where this sort of masked person or whatever would just leave pumpernickels all over the place. But do tell,
yes,
those who have not seen that very popular Wayne and Schuster sketch, what
that
the
is
Scarlet Pimpernel is.
fascinating because I'd never even seen or read the Scarlet Pimpernel either. I've just seen the Blackadder version, which is, kind of a similar, like it's just evolved into comedy sketches. I feel like that's how my generation knows about it. Yes, the Scarlet Pimpernel, they seek him there, they seek him here, they seek him there. Those Frenchies seek him everywhere. Is he in heaven? Is he in hell? That damn Scarlet Pimpernel. So it was a book, I believe, in 1905 by a baroness in the UK about a fop, a British fop.
Fop.
A fop.
Now we have to explain what a fop is.
Just a kind of a louche, kind of
Kind of a louche. Now we have to explain what a louche is.
Just what do you think of as an aristocrat, of like just being like so posh and so like I hold a handkerchief in my hand, like the classic image of the aristocrat. But this is a fop who's actually his secret identity. And he's really the Scarlet Pimpernel who spirits aristocrats away from the revolution in France and back to England. So that's who the character James Sterling was. By the way, James Sterling, not really an effective spy name. This whole spy ring with its all Christian names only kind of thing. Like, that's really gonna...
Yeah, Christian names only, except for the two guys who get killed at the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not even like, how about assumed names? Anyway, James Sterling's based on the Scarlet Pimpernel. It was a book, it was a play, it was a series of books. It was super popular. But yeah, he did. It is sort of renowned now as kind of people think, including Stan Lee, the late leader of Marvel. I think that the Scarlet Pimpernel was kind of the first superhero in a lot of ways, in terms of him having this alter ego.
Well, does it predate Zorro? When was Zorro?
It does predate Zorro.
Got it. Okay.
It's like 1905. So everything after this, including Superman, Batman, the whole idea of having an alter ego who is nothing like the superhero, goes back to the Scarlet Pimpernel. So that's the beginnings of it. So that's one reference that the show was trying to make. Like, most of the British audience would have been familiar with the Scarlet Pimpernel and the concept, and that might be the first thing they think of when they think of the Reign of Terror. But how about you, Pete? I also wanted to ask, like, what is your general historical awareness of the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror?
We took it in high school, and that's pretty much it. So it was like 11th grade. It was a few weeks. We talked about it. Certainly, we went over Robespierre and the guillotine. To the credit of the school system, there was not a lot of moralizing about who was in the right, who wasn't, and it was just a sort of a play-by-play of what happened and sort of the historical significance of it. So, I would say it was the most basic level at a 11th grade level, which for me, I'm not even going to say how long ago that was. It was, a lot of my memory from that period has been dragged and dropped. So, again, like I say, I think the broad strokes of it I felt like this serial sort of gave a feeling of experience of that in terms of the grimness and how sort of brutal it is, like, with particular stuff in the cells.
Yeah.
But in terms of the, like, I really didn't know about like what the Napoleon stuff, who was there, overall, how long it lasted, etc. Like, it's all just kind of thrown together in this sort of historical sort of smoosh of the French Revolution to me.
Well, of course, what you may know about the French Revolution is that it's all the Americans' fault.
Of
course. Not in the sense of the Americans leading the way in revolution, although it certainly was an influence. Certainly, the Declaration of the Rights of Man was very Bill of Rights-esque. But it was the fact that the French state pretty much went bankrupt, supporting the American Revolution. The king was very pro-American Revolution, not very pro-French Revolution, will surprise you to learn, but went bankrupt, so he had to call the Estates General, which is their parliament, and get some funding because he couldn't pay his creditors. And that's when it all started. And it was like there was a bad harvest, and the Estate General went just psycho on the king's ass. Once they had separated themselves off the third estate, which is like everyone else except the nobles and the clergy, which are estates 1 and 2, everyone else is like, no, screw you. We're going to have our own assembly. They take an oath on a tennis court. That's the tennis court oath. If you remember one thing from the French Revolution, remember that. And then things just went nuts from there. It just kind of like they start off like constitutional monarchy. That sounds like a good idea. And, within a matter of months, they're like, kill the king, behead him, get rid of all the aristocrats. And just the rage is just boiling over. And Robespierre was a very efficient sort of person who pointed that rage in the right directions. One thing I love about Robespierre, so he was a lawyer from the provinces, and he kind of won all these awards for being a bright young thing. And he actually gave this speech, which was like his award for some recognition for something or whatever. And the speech was to the king, Louis XVI, and Marie Antoinette, his queen. But they didn't even get out. Hey, thumbs up. They didn't even get out of the carriage to listen to it. They just sort of sat there. Wow. And Robespierre's like, screw you guys. I stayed up all night writing this. One of these days, I'm going to guillotine you two. He did not say. But yeah, he wanted to. Yeah. So there's a great video on YouTube where they go to like, number of governments counter. It's like, it gets up to like 6 different governments that this National Assembly puts in. There's a different government every week, folks. It's like French and Italian politics today.
They got one of those blackboards as like number of days since the last government.
So he ends up in charge of this thing called the Committee for Public Safety, which may be the most Orwellian named entity to ever govern a country. Because no, it wasn't about public safety. It was about pretty much executing anyone who didn't agree with the ideas of the revolution. They executed this group that had started calling for revolution in the first place because they were too centrist now. And it gets so confusing. And even French people who study this are like, I cannot keep track of all the different regimes and all of the different factions. But yeah, basically Robespierre, what you got to know is like, he was a super cool dude at first. He was calling for democracy. He actually literally called for democracy very early on.
Of course.
And, and he was known as the Incorruptible. And, people loved his speeches, and, he just got a bit carried away with his own power, and he got carried away with the purity of the revolution. And that's what led us to the Reign of Terror. Also, the fact that you had this guillotine, which was supposed to be a very democratic way of executing people. Because before that, you'd have people's heads hacked off, right? And it would take 3 or 4 blows.
A few whacks.
Yes. And especially if you were a commoner, you might get hung, drawn, or quartered, or if you were an aristocrat, you could afford to pay for a swordsman who would just come and slice your head off in one neat stroke. So it was supposed to be, it's a democratic way of death, but it turned into this thing of just 30 executions a day in the middle of Paris. It was the main spectacle. Tout le monde was interested in watching this stuff, watching the head fly into the basket. Once you've seen one head fly into a basket, you're like, I'm hooked. I want to keep watching this. So it was one of those situations.
A reality show. It was a reality show.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And it's just sort of like you can see any, not to get too political, like what this might harbor for America, but just think of the way that Trump supporters have gone pretty radical in just in his interregnum, you might call it, from his perspective.
Yeah, but settle down. It's
No, I'm not saying that everyone's going to be guillotined, but you can see the progression, right? Of
a lot of things. See similar. Put similar tendencies in from cancel culture from the left.
Oh yeah,
let's get metaphorical guillotines out for anyone who dares cross an ideological line. So,
and this is, it's technically a leftist revolution, and when right wingers say, leftists always end up as Stalin, right? Their little revolutions always start off very progressive, and this is what they end up with. They're not saying that out of nowhere. They have a point, and the French Revolution is sort of one of the prime examples of it.
Yeah, no, it's fair, and it's I like the sort of meta perspective, not really taking sort of the political side of like, if you are so insecure in your revolution, whatever that may be, that you need to guillotine everyone who dares like get out 1 inch out of the being in your vein. That's a problem. Then you're like, if you're doing 30 executions a day, whatever they may be, that's okay. You might want to just start rethinking what you're even doing here. So,
and it was also partly, and it's kind of appropriate that so much of the Reign of Terror story takes place in prisons, particularly this prison, which housed, I think, about 3,000 prisoners. Like, it's a real place. Housed about 3,000 prisoners during the Reign of Terror.
That one.
And it was sort of, so the guillotine was also used kind of a extreme, drastic solution to prison overcrowding, which is a problem that they had. And what Robespierre, this one-time champion of democracy, did is he basically got rid of the rule of law. He was like, you can't have a lawyer, you can't say anything in your own defense. You're just going to be tried, and we're either going to free you or execute you. A surprising number of people were freed, we should say. But then also a surprising number of people were just killed in the prison. And we'll never know the true cost of the Reign of Terror, because it just reigned in the streets. And it was one of those situations where it's like, you can kind of imagine what happens. Neighbors would turn on their neighbors.
Sure. Well, you see that in the show, too. I mean, you got the tailor, the person who does the doctor's costume, and there's any number of double crosses. The physician, everyone's just, I'm going to turn on people, and that way, at least I'll save my own skin. Like, they're not really taking a side other than the side of survival and self-preservation.
So there is this. So Robespierre has his his former friend who was on the Committee of Public Safety with him executed, and the guy ominously says Robespierre's next. And he was kind of right, because the deputies turned on him. There was a plot, and like, oh God, we got to get rid of this guy. He's kind of gone a bit power mad. And he did give this big speech to the deputies. They kind of compressed the timeline in the Doctor Who story. But it is true when they come. So they bring Robespierre out of that room. Remember, where he's got like his broken jaw. Oh yeah, they don't really say. Yeah, he's shot. They don't really
off screen.
He's shot off screen.
That's pretty brutal for Doctor Who, even though they don't even really show blood. It's like, wow, I was shot in the face.
What actually happened was Robespierre tried to shoot himself.
Oh.
And failed.
Well, arguably that is what happened. I mean, they don't really show the scene, so everyone can make their assumptions.
Yeah.
But
so it's interesting they don't like that opportunity for a bit more drama. They don't really make it clear. And it's so brutal, because like he's got this bandage for the next few days as he's waiting to be guillotined. And the last thing the executioner does before he drops the blade is he rips the bandage off Robespierre's face. Like the bandage that's holding his jaw, basically, to his face. And Robespierre just screams in pain. And like that's the only thing that stopped the screams was the blade.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a good moment to do a little more housekeeping. Let everyone know what their thoughts are on the Reign of Terror via the socials. You could talk to us on Pull to Open on TikTok and Blue Sky, or Pull to Open 63 on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Threads, and relate just how traumatized you were by Chris's description of accurate historical events, and whether or not you think that should have been in the show. I'm going with no. But now I think it's time to answer some questions.
All right.
And those questions are the 4 questions to Doomsday. First question, why did the randomizer take us here?
Well, it turns out the Reign of Terror is the Randomizer's favorite historical period ever. And yeah, it just likes a bit of French history. No, what the Randomizer loves is Hartnell historicals.
Yeah,
It
absolutely.
can't get enough of them. And it's really astonishing. Pete, we're so close to a Hartnell historical bingo.
Yeah, we're getting close. We've done. Yeah, wow. What are we missing?
We're missing the Massacre.
The Massacre, of course.
And the Crusade.
Oh, yeah.
And if you count 10,000 BC or 100,000 BC, whatever the hell Unearthly Child is really called. Yeah, I don't either.
No.
Let's not count that. No.
We won't count that.
Actual,
just 2 more. Wow.
Yeah, just 2 more. We've been to all that. It's super weird, right? Like, we shouldn't be anywhere close to if this was a truly random distribution. So I think the Randomizer is trying to tell us something. He's trying to send us a warning about the Reign of Terror.
I don't see too many connections with the Reign of Terror to Daleks, which is what we had a big trilogy of recently, or the Curse of Fenric, other than it's a nice reminder that you don't need creatures or ancient things from the future to represent evil. I mean, there is plenty of evil right here in history and a lot of brutality, cruelty. In fact, it's probably the better way. And if there's a link to something we've done recently, I think it's Demons of the Punjab, which is also, again, not a pure historical, but the evil in that episode is clearly very human in nature and about sort of people preying on brothers, literally in that episode. But certainly the fraternité being, not the strongest bond, and then there's just lots of cruelty and brutality that rolls. So there it is. Just go to history.
Liberty, equality, fraternity. By the way, coined by Robespierre. When he was still a nice guy. But it's interesting you should mention the Demons of the Punjab, because I totally got Demons of the Punjab vibes. That whole sense of a people kind of like all of a sudden out of nowhere the madness arrives, right? You unpicked something from society and then everything falls apart. It's extra appropriate because the original idea for this historical was going to be set in the Terry Nation writing about the Indian Rebellion of 1857.
Oh,
right?
Wow. That would have been interesting.
It would have been so interesting, because then the first 3 historicals in the Hartnell era would have been nothing to do with Europe. It would have been, Marco Polo, and then the Aztecs.
Yeah.
And then this, and it would have been 3 for 3 in terms of non-European history. So
RTD, there's still some territory to mine there. You go for it.
Yeah, David Whittaker was also supposed to do a story on the Spanish Armada. That got crossed off, and then only then did we end up in the Reign of Terror.
All right. Well, not sorry that we ended up here, but it is time to move on to the second question, which, of course, is what if the evil plot had succeeded? The evil plot being what exactly? Are we talking about Robespierre trying to hang on to power?
We could be. I'd like to suggest an alternate evil plot, which is the Doctor being so sassy with Ian and Barbara that he drops them off because he thinks they're in Somerset, and
then just leaves
close enough, and then just leaves, just abandons them, which was his original plan.
It's true,
right? So Ian and Barbara would be stuck in the Reign of Terror.
About that, because I think it's interesting, because that scene and even other, maybe even the end, sort of suggests that the Doctor can steer the TARDIS more than he seems to be able to later. Because as I recall in that other pure historical, I believe it's The Smugglers, where he basically just confesses he doesn't really know where they're going to be. I
don't know. I never know.
Basically a randomizer. And here he seems to be trying. So what this suggests is that the TARDIS might have been working better previous to like the fast return switch breaking, the chameleon circuit breaking. So there was a period where he was able to steer it a little more. And because the whole thing suggests that he's also been here before, right? At least at some point in the Terror, maybe not necessarily this exact date. So, it's an interesting thing to unpack, that maybe he did some kind of reboot, and you know how you might reboot your computer or your app and you lose your browser history or your settings, and you're just like, well, you didn't realize you were going by some setting you had kicked in and then you lose it. That seems to be what's happened to the Doctor here.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's also interesting, by the way, the only thing that stops that evil plot of the Doctor succeeding, abandoning Ian and Barbara, is the promise of a drink. Which means we must revisit our question of is the first Doctor a drunk? Because we talked about this in the Gunfighters. We talked about him taking mead in the Time Meddler. He refuses wine from the jailer in this, so he's not a complete lush, but he does like the idea of having a drink with friends. So he's a social drinker. Maybe the randomizer is taking us here to finally figure that out. But yeah, okay, so that's the evil plot of the Doctor. That succeeded. Ian and Barbara are pretty much dead because their French isn't that great. And
even if they survive, they're dead well before 1963. Yeah. So
yeah, it's maybe if they're lucky, it's an Amy and Rory situation, and they get to live long and happy lives in the past, and the Doctor can never visit them again. But okay, let's say the evil plot is Robespierre's to just try to execute all of his opponents. That was just never going to succeed.
Even if he holds on to power for a little longer, I mean, I guess you have to go through the exercise of history being altered, and so you sort of get some sort of alternate timeline. And then, I don't think you necessarily prevent the broad strokes of history unfolding as they did, but presumably within this story, Sterling gets exposed, he gets executed. What happens to the TARDIS team? I don't really know, because there's a lot of things sort of on a tactical level I would not have done. So it seems like when Leon betrays them and they're all like, well, surely there's going to be some Revolutionary Guards coming to the house where they're at or something. And then they sort of gloss over that. They sort of go, no, he would have done it himself. I know him. It's like, well, shouldn't you just be cautious here and never go back to that house? Isn't that probably the most prudent thing to do? And they just don't. And I presume the only thing I can think of is they just didn't want to go to another set. We only have so many sets here. We have to just keep coming back to this house.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if we believe Susan, where she says we might not get back to the ship if Grandfather hears we're in the Reign of Terror, maybe he would just want to stick around, especially if they're like, what? Wait a minute, Robespierre survived? He's supposed to be at the guillotine right now. And the Doctor's like, fascinating. I'm going to stick around and find out what goes on. So maybe they all get stuck in Napoleonic France. And, or if maybe Napoleon even takes
turns into kind of a Back to the Future situation where they have to put history back on course. And it's sort of alternate history, but not too much. And then the books get written, I don't know, in some other way. They get edited. So that could be interesting. All right. Moving on to the third question, which is, where is the Clara Splinter? Okay, so go with me on this one. I initially had a very boring explanation where she was just sort of the person supplying the jailer with his cognac or his wine or whatever. But here's my other alternate. Maybe there's two Splinters here. And how do I explain this? Okay, so there's a point where Ian has that person in the cell who tells him the chien gris, this is where this thing is, and then miraculously, and then he gets captured at that spot or whatever. But then in episode 6, miraculously, he remembers a conversation that never happened about this other bar where they end up going to find Napoleon
and this meeting
with Taras. Right. Yeah, exactly. And what this, I think, behind the scenes, it shows us they were rewriting on the fly. But I think this is something where time can be rewritten on the fly. So, in other words, there's a Clara Splinter there in the house or overhearing things and basically understands, oh, crap, Ian doesn't know where the thing is. He didn't get enough information from Webster. So she goes back, and this is all off screen, or another Splinter goes back to the cell to tell Webster to tell Ian this other thing too. So in other words, there's some timey-wimey stuff between those two periods within the Reign of Terror to ensure there's some time editing so that Ian, in the moment, as the Splinter is doing this, suddenly remembers, oh, yeah, he also said this other thing. I don't know why I remembered that until this other second. And then you have Clara in the foreground, just kind of like thumbs up. Got it.
Yes, Clara. I had exactly the same thing. Clara is at Le Chien Gris, the grey dog, and she's a barmaid there because, you know, we've already seen like Victorian barmaid Clara, you know, and is she a barmaid as well as a governess in the Snowman?
She is.
Forget. Yep. That's right. So she's obviously like she can pull off two roles. So yeah, she's a barmaid there. She just like pops her head out and says something to Ian about, oh yeah, you're here because that Webster dude. Actually, he wanted me to tell you this other thing. But don't mention my name. If this other comes up, don't mention my name. I wasn't even here. Like I'm
Just
in trouble.
Webster said this.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think we're in agreement that the Clara Splinter can fill a very well noticed plot hole to those who have actually noticed the serial in the first place.
Good job, Clara. Possibly in 3 places at once there. All right, moving on to the last question, the ultimate question, the only question that matters for the Reign of Terror. What did we think of this story? So the Poll to Open rating system has 6 ratings. There's the Dalek, which we give to a good episode of Doctor Who. The Ogron, which is for an irredeemably bad episode of Doctor Who. The Professor Hater, which is a not great episode, but hey, at least we learned something. And the Viscount Banger, which we reserve for the best of the best. The Fixed Point in Time, which is a show beyond rating, something we can't rate often for reasons of nostalgia. Or the Lady Cassandra, which is a paper-thin plot, but hey, at least it looks good, especially with a little moisturizing.
Yes, and perhaps with a little sash and a little hat, like the Doctor's fabulous costume. Well, I think this one is a hater.
A hater
because they tried something like I maybe we can do a special episode on this at some point. The notion of like getting lost in a story. I mentioned this last week, the idea of getting lost, but not in a good way, where you just like can't follow the plot. And you're just like, I don't even know what's going on. That happened to me in this case. Like I had to read the transcript again. I had to watch one of the middle episodes again to just get what the hell was going on here when they're coming in and out of the house and like who's Jules, who's Jean, too many characters, I can't even. So like it doesn't hang together as a story for me, but they were clearly trying something. They clearly wanted historical content in Doctor Who. They were casting around with like different ways to do it. Obviously, John Luca Rotti did Marco Polo. We talked about what a fine example that was. This not so much. And yes, people should be able to see it, all of it, animated episodes included, and it should be easier to find, but I just don't think that I could recommend it as a story. They were trying something, but I don't think we should call it a Professor Hater because we are in the middle of the Reign of Terror, and I feel like a professor will be executed, a professor will meet the guillotine. So, arise, citizen hater.
Not a professor. No.
Not a professor. Just a citizen. Just like you. A sans-culotte.
Well, I'm not going to be as hard. I'm going to give it Le Dalek. Yeah, it's definitely too long. There are problems, like you say. I don't think the problems are that serious because I really don't think the minutia of the plot is all that important, to be honest with you. I think it is more of a backdrop and it's more of a mood, and I think it really succeeds on those points. And at the same time, even though the characters are a little confusing about who's doing what and their motivations at times, I do like that you peel back a couple of layers to not just characters, but also the caricatures they're doing. Like a couple examples, the peasants who are soldiers early on, and they're clearly not just soldiers, right? They're not well trained. They're just a bunch of folks that are barely obeying orders and doing whatever. I think that's very smart. And another one, I think it's Jules, where they sort of assume he's an aristocrat, and he basically says, "No, I really don't like what's happening to my country, and I feel like this is the best way to support it." by sort of working against the revolution, or at least saving people from the revolutionary forces here and there. So like I do like that there are layers there, and it did exactly what they're doing, the motivations here and there. I don't think you necessarily need to keep it straight in your head, because I don't think people making it were keeping it straight in their head. They were kind of just, what's the double cross? They were just thinking about like, okay, how do we juice up this scene here and there, and who can be the bad guy, and let's make that just on the fly. So I'm not too worried about it. So I think it really works. It's a solid, successful episode of Doctor Who. It's $1 for me.
It's a Dalek, le Dalek, which you might like to know that the French for exterminate is exterminaire, so it doesn't even have to change its language very much. All right.
Wow. Put that with the German Daleks from Journey's End at some point. But folks, you get to have your say now about the Reign of Terror. Go, Spotify listeners, go to your app. Go ahead and rate this story as the Dalek, Ogron, Professor Hater, Viscount Banger, Fixed Point in Timer, Lady Cassandra. Have your say, and we will reveal the results in a future episode of Pull to Open. But now we're going to see where those future episodes will take us by activating the randomizer.
Yes, the randomizer, or le randomizer, as we call it. Or we never again will call it.
We've shut the door on this adventure. We'll never call it again.
Yes, the randomizer has two component. Oh God, sorry everyone. Peter that controls the first one. It's the codex. It's the list of Doctor Who stories in sequential order. Pete, how many stories do we have left to watch?
It was 194.
194, or 192 plus 2 more Hartnell historicals. Yes, so I plug those numbers into the other component of the randomizer, which is random.org, or the executor. The executor with a guillotine, with a swift chop to the guillotine, it dispenses a number without going through any messy aristocratic algorithms. No, it looks at pure, honest, working class atmospheric noise. Yes, the atoms bouncing around the atmosphere do not wear trousers, they are the sun's culottes. And yes, we'd like to issue challenges to the randomizer before we find a number between 1 and 214. You said, right? Yes.
One in 194.
Sorry, 194. Sorry, I'm trying to give us extra ones. Yeah, so one is
trying to take us all the way to like Shooty's third season.
That's right. The randomizer goes forward in time as well.
So I'm going to give a challenge here.
Yep.
In celebration of Doctor Who's first location shooting, I'd like to take us to something with some pretty extensive or interesting location shooting, something where the location stuff was actually quite notable. So do something with that randomizer.
Interesting.
That could work, yeah. I mean, we've already did Spearhead from Space, so I don't know if
all on film.
Yeah. Oh, and also none of that was studio, as I understood. But anyway.
Right. Well, I'm gonna say it. Let's just randomizer. You love Hartnell historicals. Let's do it. Let's finish this. You're going for the bingo card. I'm going for the bingo card. I'm going for give us Massacre or give us Crusade. Or if you must do, give us 100,000 BC. If you randomize
the inside straight of all inside straights, almost as specific as the TV movie, but maybe it'll surprise us and give us that.
Let's find out.
All right, let's do it in 4, 3, 2, 1.
Run for your life.
133.
Oh my. New Who. We are at Amy's Choice.
Oh, I love Amy's Choice. Yeah. Oh my goodness. The Dream Lord. Yes.
And true to its form, the randomizer responding to me from like weeks ago when I said we haven't done enough Smith.
Yep.
Let's do some Smith.
Well, there's also a lot of location in this one.
There is.
It's all set in the village, except for the bits that are set in the TARDIS.
Yeah. That's true. There's decent stuff here.
Yeah, nice one.
Okay, well, folks, this has been Pull to Open. We're really looking forward to revisiting New Who next week. We might even have a surprise guest on the podcast to help us.
Is it the Dream Lord? It's the Dream Lord, isn't it?
Could be the Dream Lord, but no. It's going to be someone from another Doctor Who podcast that you know and love, and very appropriate because Come Along and Pond are in the title of the podcast. Which that might even be dialogue in this episode, so we'll see. So anyway, guys, subscribe to us on the socials or wherever you're encountering us. We're at Pull to Open or Pull to Open 63 on all kinds of social networks. Once again, on YouTube, you can become a true companion to this podcast. With $7.99 a month, you get the podcast a day early, or you can even become a Viscount, and you can feature as a guest on the program. Thank you so much. We'll see you in the Dreamscape.
That's right. We will see you in Ledworth, or will we?